Thanks so much, Tara. My name's Sam Tatam. I'm Global Consulting Partner of the Behavioural Science Practice, and I'm really thrilled to join the main stage here for Nudgestock 2021. And I want to talk a little bit about evolutionary ideas and how behavioural science can help us to out-innovate our competition. And I want to start on an observation I made some time ago. I was watching my young daughter, she's about to turn 3, water some pot plants. And she had 2 pot plants, a smaller pot plant and a larger pot plant. And she had 1 watering can. And she went over to the small pot plant and she put a little bit of water in and then moved to the big one and emptied the entire can. And I thought this is a lovely example of proportionality. Humans have a tendency to seek proportionality. We magnitude match. We assume that a loud bang required a loud input or a large input by which to make it. It's why we often find it hard to believe that something as small as a mosquito can cause something as devastating as yellow fever. And the same can be true with innovation and ideas. We have an assumption that big problems require big ideas and big solutions, or novel problems require novel ideas or novel solutions. We need to create something that the world has never seen before. We feel this need to cause a revolution. And my contention today is what if this is a big mistake? What if this search to create something the world has never seen before, as we're faced with big or novel challenges, actually we're missing the solutions that are right in front of us, that are right in front of our nose? What if the problem had already been solved before? And I want to help us to reach this conclusion together by starting in innovation, but starting in the innovation of a train. And not just any train. The train that runs the stretch of rail that connects Tokyo and Osaka, the Tokaido Shinkansen. This 515-kilometre stretch of rail. And when Ijai Netkatsu, the general manager of the West Japan Rail Company, was tasked with reducing the time that it took the trains to cross this stretch to 2.5 hours. What was interesting is the speed wasn't a challenge for the train. Actually, they had existing trains that could run this fast. But the faster the trains went, the louder the noise became, and actually outreached the Japanese regulations with respect to noise. And one of the key causes of the noise was actually coming from the train's pantograph, a part of the train that connects the train to the wires ahead. And as the trains raced at blistering speeds, it was creating vortexes of air, producing large turbulences, again exceeding the regulations in Japan at the time. So one of the first things the team did was work to innovate the train's pantograph. And while Ijai is a passionate engineer, fortunately he's also an avid birdwatcher. And rather than thinking from a creationist perspective, actually Ijai and the team looked to the air for the solution. And one of the first pieces of inspiration was from the owl. The owl is a nocturnal hunter. It's evolved to be able to sort of swoop down and ambush its prey in almost near silence. And it's able to do this because of the presence of micro-serrations on its feathers. These micro-serrations are able to chop up the vortexes into micro-turbulences and dissipate the sound. So the team then created micro-serrations on the train's pantograph and worked to dissipate the sound. Now, the second cause of noise on the Tokaido Shinkansen was actually through the series of tunnels along the stretch of rail. And as the trains went at full speed, they were creating tunnel booms. A bit like the sound of firing a bullet from a gun, this large compressed air going through a tunnel. So again, looking to the skies, Ijai and the team borrowed from the kingfisher, a bird that's perfectly evolved to fly down from the air and stun its prey in water, a substance 800 times denser than air, to skewer its prey. So borrowing from the owl and the kingfisher, the team were able to produce the Shinkansen 500. And this is Ijai in front of the train, a train that was 10% faster, used 15% less energy, and was inspired by the owl and the kingfisher. So why do I start a story on psychology with a story of a train? Well, this is a fantastic example of the field of biomimicry. And biomimicry is a practice that assumes that if something's around in nature today, it survived 3.8 billions of years of research and development. There's got to be something good about it. So we can deploy it to solve distinctively human problems. And just as the kingfisher can inspire a train, the shapes of humpback whale fins are being used to inspire wind turbines. The tubercles on the fins are able to increase the lift while reducing the drag. Beavers are inspiring wetsuit material. So by better understanding these evolved biological solutions, the field of biomimicry is enabling systematic innovation to solve distinctively human problems. But this isn't the first time that an evolutionary mindset was recommended to solve human problems. And actually there's a second story that occurs, ironically, in a revolutionary period in our world's history. And a star of this story is Genrikh Altshuler. Now, Genrikh was a Soviet engineer and lifelong inventor, and he found his way at a young age into the patent office of the Russian Navy. Here he was surrounded by hundreds of patents, and he found through this observation that many of the solutions that were being solved by engineers had already been solved in other categories. In fact, later, he and his team actually observed 200,000 of the world's most successful patents to review. And they identified that up to 95% of these solutions had already been solved in another category. Up to 95% of the solutions had been solved. And through this analysis, the team identified a series of technical patterns. Just as we might codify a species based on the presence of a backbone or a spinal cord or the features of gills, the team summarized a series of inventive principles, these patterns of technical features that are replicated across many engineering solutions. By understanding these evolved patterns, they could identify inventive principles like nested doll, right? The solution of putting one object inside another, or passing a feature of an object through an open cavity. And while this is only one inventive principle, it represents many hundreds of technical solutions in the world around us. The telescopic lens is an example of a nested doll. A nail polish that has its brush inside the bottle is an example of a nested doll. A retractable tape measure is an example of a nested doll. So through his analysis of over 200,000 patents and the identification of inventive principles, Altshuler and his team developed the TRIZ methodology, a Russian acronym for Theory of Inventive Problem Solving. By understanding these evolved patterns in technical solutions, then they are able to drive systematic innovation to solve human problems. Now, unsurprisingly for us, the field of behavioural science is also heavily driven from an evolutionary mindset. And it's not only that our perceptions have evolved, or our biases have evolved, or heuristics have evolved through evolutionary circumstances, but also that over time we've developed robust psychological solutions. For eons, restaurateurs have filled their windows from the front back to normalise patronage, to create a social norm. If you've ever seen a recommended retail price with a big red line through it, you've tapped into a powerful anchoring heuristic. Closing down sales are examples of scarcity drivers. Again, this is happening around us. So through intuition, trial and error, social learning, or design, we're surrounded by a rich array of evolved psychological solutions. Just as we see in nature, where different species in biology can converge on the same evolutionary conclusion. For example, the shark is a fish and the dolphin is a mammal, yet both have converged based under the stresses and pressures of their environment to feature a dorsal fin. We can also see the same with psychological solutions. A remote control and an airline ticket have converged on the same solution for complexity reduction. This is Ibrahim Yücel. In 2013, Ibrahim, following his father's sad passing, decided to kick his 26-year smoking habit. And rather than going for patches or going cold turkey, actually Uchill created a cage for his head, and every morning he would lock his head in the cage and give his wife and two children the keys to the cage. Now this might seem like an extreme solution, but psychologically it's similar to deleting your ex's phone number so you don't call them after a couple of wines, or chopping up your credit card so you don't overspend. We can see patterns in psychological solutions. And just as the world of physics, our understanding and language of aerodynamics and lift and drag enabled the connection between the kingfisher and a speed train, the language of behavioural science, the work of government and academia to codify these patterns of human problem solving and enabling this connection for us today. Because what we say we can see, and what we see we can begin to apply. So how do we do this? So one element of the story I didn't recognise with our friend Altshuler was that after his discovery of 95% of the solutions had already been solved, he wrote Comrade style in a relatively candid note identifying some of the weaknesses and failures in the Russian military's approach to innovation. Well, this went as well as you might expect, and Altshuler was arrested and sent to labour camp on a 25-year sentence, just above the Arctic Circle. And in this camp, he was essentially tortured. He was kept on an interrogation conveyor. He was asked questions all night and prevented from sleeping during the day. And realising he couldn't continue with this, he asked himself the question, how can I sleep while stay awake? Right? Essentially, how can I have my eyes open and closed at the same time? Now, this sounds like an impossible contradiction. How can this be the case? Well, working with his prison cellmate, they actually fashioned a pair of eyes on a cigarette packet and charred pupils with matches and cigarettes and stuck them on Altshuler's closed eyelids. So as the guards walked past, it looked like he was awake, but he was fundamentally asleep. Now this innovation, this resolution of solving a contradiction has become a foundation of his TRIZ methodology. How can we solve contradictions to create breakthrough innovations? In the technical world, if we look at a bulletproof jacket or a Kevlar jacket, how might we make it strong enough to stop a bullet, yet light enough to wear? How might we make an umbrella big enough to cover the human body, but small enough to fit in a handbag? And to help us with these technical features, the TRIZ methodology has created a contradiction matrix. We're able to map up features like size, weight, length, volume, these measurable attributes that Rory would argue, and does argue that we're biased to focus on because they're numerically expressed. How might we increase the length while reducing the volume? Right? Seems like an impossible contradiction. And to help us solve this technical contradiction, we have our inventive principle, nested doll. And the nested doll is reinforced by many different creative solutions, engineering solutions, like the telescopic lens, our nail polish, and retractable tape measure. Now, just as we can solve technical contradictions, we can begin to solve psychological contradictions. And in my book, I explore 5. How might we increase trust without changing the truth? How might we aid decisions without limiting choice? How can we improve experiences without changing their duration? And how might we trigger action without forcing a response? And how we can boost loyalty without increasing compensation. And just as in TRIZ, behind each contradiction, now we're able to map a series of psychological inventive principles, enriching the language of loyalty. We can speak about commitment, reciprocity, sunk cost, and variability. And just like the world of TRIZ and biomimicry, behind each solution there's a rich array of adopted examples in the wild. I think it's important to note that the Shinkansen 500 was not innovated through birds. It was the specific evolved differences of the kingfisher and the owl. So just as we can better understand the differences of commitment device or Ulysses contracts for Uchill and a chopped up credit card, we're now able to better connect the worlds of a Kinder Surprise and a Doritos limited release for variability. We can learn from a shopping trolley and an advertising pre-roll to best borrow to address sunk cost. So just as the field of biomimicry today is helping us to systematically innovate by better understanding evolved solutions in biology, and TRIZ is helping us to identify these evolved technical solutions, we're now better able to deploy evolved psychological solutions. The language of behavioural science, the codification, is helping us to connect solutions from the wild. We can breed from the best. We can work to accelerate natural processes, and you can work to out-innovate your competition. While it might feel like you need a revolution, while it might be tempted to think we should start from scratch, what we really need is to deploy the evolutionary. And thrilled to share, as Tara mentioned, that my book, Evolutionary Ideas, is launching next year, that explores many of these ideas in much more detail. It's been a real privilege to join the main stage for Nudgestock 2021. Thank you for listening, and let's get on with the festival.